Welcome to Midnight Murmur. Here, the night comes alive with chilling tales and spine-tingling stories. If you crave the thrill of the unknown and the eerie whisper of the supernatural, you've found your new haunt. Join us as we dive into the darkest corners of the human mind, unraveling short horror stories that will keep you up at night. Hit that subscribe button, turn off the lights, and let the murmur begin. Unseen exposure. Max Burns is an amateur photographer. Though his profession is not photography, he does take photos as a hobby. On one of his days off, he received a call to take some photos of an abandoned house. The person who requested this of him was a friend named Violet Moss. She is a realtor who flips houses and resells them to make a profit. Max agreed and went to the address Violet had given him. Upon arrival, the house came into view. He had never seen something so unique. It was a cliff-anchored house. This type of home is only seen sometimes due to the frequent landslides in the area. Pulling into a makeshift parking space, he parked his car, grabbed his gear, and walked up to the door. A note was left on the door telling Max where the key was. At the bottom of the note, Violet apologized for not being there since she had to draw up the final paperwork. Retrieving the key from under a flower pot, he went inside. Shutting the door behind him, he flipped the light switch for the lights that slowly blinked to life. Setting up his gear, he began to go through each room, taking photos. It was relatively empty and seemed odd to Max since Violet always decorated, especially if she would make a sale. With the bottom floor done, he headed upstairs, cutting the lights on. Stepping into the doorway of one of the bedrooms, he snapped a photo, and his camera began beeping at him. Confused, he looked at the screen flashing with the low battery symbol. He sighed, took out another battery pack, and replaced it. The camera was fully charged, so why did it suddenly become drained? Shaking his head, Max continued finishing up the upstairs, then made his way back down. Walking to the kitchen counter, he opened his laptop and inserted the memory card from his camera to review and edit the photos he had taken. Looking through the images, he came across the one he had taken of the first upstairs bedroom. Inside the room, there was a figure. Static and gray, the person was about average height and thin, with their head hanging down. There was no way this was a ghost. Max didn't believe in the supernatural and blamed the camera for malfunctioning due to the drained battery, so he would retake the photo. Max sent Violet an email with the photos he approved, and she quickly replied, asking him if he was still inside the house. He replied, telling her he was still inside the house finishing up. Violet, in a panic, told him to get out of there. A creak from the stairs made him turn as he took out his phone and snapped a picture with its camera. Max cursed, forgetting his flash was on, and tried to take another when footsteps thumped across the floor towards him. He dropped his phone and backed away from the island counter. What had made its way down to him? Max's phone began to ring, startling him. From where he stood, he could see Violet trying to call him. Max cursed under his breath. Okay, Max, don't be such a baby. Ghosts are not real. Just grab your phone and answer it. He said aloud to himself, taking a deep breath before grabbing his phone and quickly answering it. Violet. Maxie, is everything okay? I'm on my way to your location. I need you to grab your stuff and go wait in your car. She tells him, trying not to express the rising panic in her voice. Is something wrong with the house? Max asked, looking around and listening to his surroundings as he packed his stuff. Just trust me and get out. She ended the call, and Max did as he was told. He put his bag over his shoulder, and his cell phone was the last thing he reached for. The lights in the room flickered before going out, ultimately leaving him in nothing but the darkness of the kitchen. When Max let out an exhale of air, he could see his breath, making him visibly shiver. Keeping his eyes on the middle of the room, he walked backward, reaching his hand behind him to open the door. Once the door was open, he stepped out, almost tripping in the process, and shut the door. Moving quickly, he went to his car, opened the door, and sat inside. Max tossed his bag into the passenger seat and took out his phone to look at his photo of the stairs. What he looked at differed from the one he had taken from the bedroom. There was a man with no head, and his body was covered with something black. It dripped onto the floor, and the axe he carried was covered in dried blood. Looking up from his phone, he heard the house's front door open. He watched as it stayed open for a while until it slammed shut. Could the ghost not leave the house? If that was the case, Max was grateful. Up beside him, Violet parked next to him. They sat in her car and talked briefly about what had just happened, and Max showed her the photos. "This is just crazy." Violet paused and looked at Max. "I'm so sorry this happened to you. I knew strange things were happening, but you got them on camera. Didn't anyone else try taking photos or recordings?" he questioned. Violet shook her head. "No, my crew was scared, so I looked into its history. Once I found out what happened, I looked for a buyer immediately. The person that I found deals with this sort of thing. Is there a person who deals with those things in there? Did Violet find an exorcist or a medium? Hopefully, that person is both." "What exactly did you find out about this place?" Max asked, putting his phone and laptop away. Violet gripped the steering wheel, looking over at him with a frown. That man in the photo killed his family in that house. His wife had been cheating on him, and he found out. She began to explain. Violet slowly took her hands off the wheel and placed them in her lap. He then hung himself above the stairs. When a family friend found them, he'd been hanging there so long that his head detached. His wife was practically decapitated upstairs. Thankfully, they didn't have children, she added. Max shuddered, thankful he had taken the pictures and got out of there when he did. He'd hate to think about what would have happened if he had stayed inside a little longer. "You don't have any more houses like this, do you?" Max asked nervously. Violet shook her head. "No, but if I do, I'll warn you first. I'd appreciate that." He sighs, leaning his head back against the seat and closing his eyes. This was enough excitement for one day. Hopefully, the person who bought this house knows what they're doing. A week later, Violet contacted him. "Hey Violet, did the new owners have any luck?" Max asked as he headed inside from his regular 9 to 5 job for the day. "Yes, but I have another favor to ask," she replied, hearing 2 other people in the background. "Oh, sure. What do you need exactly?" Max nervously swallowed, tossing his keys onto the dish in the middle of his coffee table. "How do you feel about doing spirit photography? As a profession?" "The owner says they would pay you a lot." Max pondered this for a moment. If it paid enough, he could quit his office job, especially if this person bought homes like this often. "Max Burns?" A deep, gruff voice said on the phone now, making him sit upright. "My name is Andy Graves, and I need your assistance with my business ventures. You'll be paid for your time and will constantly be on the move. Are you okay with these terms?" Surprised, he visibly nodded, even if Andy couldn't see him. "Yes." "Good. See you at the airport a few days from now. Monday 6 in the morning, don't be late." Andy ended the call, and Max sat on his couch in shock. If this is a full-time profession now, he thought. Monday came sooner than expected, and he was rushing out the door. He looked at his apartment from over his shoulder before shutting the door one last time. He had already said his goodbyes to Violet the day before, so there would be no tears. When he arrived at the airport, he didn't know what to expect when looking for Andy Graves, but for some reason, he knew it was him when they met. "Andy Graves? You must be Max Burns. It will be a pleasure working with you, spirit photographer." Max nodded, feeling a shiver go down their spine as they shook hands. Just what had he gotten himself into? The Clockmaker's Bargain. In the perpetual twilight of Nocturnia, where gas lamps flickered weakly against the encroaching darkness, Elias Cogsworth hunched over his workbench. His gnarled fingers, stained with oil and scarred from countless accidents, trembled as they adjusted the gears of his latest creation. The clock face stared back at him, its hands twitching erratically, like the legs of a dying spider. A discordant chime from the shop door shattered the silence, the sound grating against Elias's nerves like rusted nails. He looked up, rheumy eyes straining through the gloom. "We're closed," he called out, his voice a dry rasp. "Are you certain?" came the reply, a voice like glass shards scraping against bone. "For I've traversed the veil between worlds to seek your expertise, Master Cogsworth." From the writhing shadows emerged a figure that seemed to drain the meager light from the room. Elias's breath caught in his throat, a strangled gasp of terror as he recognized the unmistakable aura of the Fey folk eyes like dying stars and skin that pulsed with an otherworldly, sickly glow. "A moonlight weaver," Elias whispered, his words a prayer and a curse. The Fey smiled, revealing teeth sharp as razors and just as hungry. "Indeed, I am Lunara, and I come with a proposition that you cannot refuse." Elias's hand moved to the iron gear. He kept in his pocket a pitiful ward against Fey malevolence. His fingers brushed cold flesh instead, and he recoiled in horror. Where the gear should have been, a severed finger now resided, its nail blackened and peeling. Lunara glided closer, her gown rippling like liquid shadows, leaving frost in her wake. "Your reputation precedes you, Master Cogsworth. They say you can capture time itself within your creation. But oh, how time has ravaged you." Elias tried to back away, but his legs refused to obey. "What is it you want?" he croaked, terror clawing at his throat. "A bargain," Lunara said, producing a skein of thread that writhed like live wires, pulsing with an inner darkness. "This is spun from the very essence of eternal night. With it, you could create a clock that not only measures time but devours it, granting the user immortality." Elias's eyes widened, a spark of avarice cutting through his fear. "And what would you ask in return?" Lunara's smile widened impossibly, splitting her face like a rotten fruit. "A mere trifle. In exchange for this thread, I ask for all the time you've wasted in your life, and the lives of all those you hold dear." The clockmaker's brow furrowed, cold sweat beading on his pallid skin. "Wasted time? The lives of—" "No, I can't." "Oh, but you can," Lunara purred, her voice a seductive whisper. "Think of it, Elias. Eternal life, eternal youth. No more aching joints, no more fading eyesight. All those you love, frozen in time, never to age, never to die. All it costs is the time already squandered." As Elias wavered, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A tiny clockwork pixie emerged from the innards of a broken pocket watch, its gears whirring in frantic warning. But as it flew towards him, Lunara's hand shot out, catching the pixie mid-flight. With a cruel smile, she crushed it, gears and springs falling like macabre confetti. "Enough distractions," Lunara hissed. "Choose, clockmaker. Eternal life or eternal regret." Elias trembled, his mind reeling. The thread promised power beyond imagination, but the price. He thought of his family, his friends. Would they thank him for this gift, or curse him for trapping them in an endless twilight? I accept," Elias whispered, the words falling from his lips like lead weights. Lunara's laughter filled the shop, a sound of breaking glass and screaming wind. "Wise choice, clockmaker. Now, let us begin." As the Fey's icy fingers touched his forehead, Elias screamed. He felt time being ripped from him, memories unraveling like frayed cloth. In the distance, he heard the cries of his loved ones, their lives being drained away to fuel his terrible bargain. The last thing Elias saw before darkness took him was the clock on his workbench. Its hands spun wildly, ticking away the moments he would never get back, counting down to an eternity of regret. The haunted house. So we have a haunted house in our area, and it has been running like this for many years. Years ago, a guy had bought the haunted house and made it into a haunted museum sort of thing. People who enjoy haunted places love to go to this place to experience the supernatural. Apparently, this house has a dark history full of murders and tragedy, and the souls from those people who had suffered in this house still roam around the house. They still shout out help, and you can even hear it. I didn't believe it until I went to the haunted, and I heard the voices from the dead calling "Do help." It gave me a chill up my spine to hear the voices of the head echoing throughout the haunted house, calling for help. I felt so useless because I couldn't do anything to help them. The supernatural energy is so high inside this house that you don't need a Ouija board. The banging sounds and the screams for help from the ghosts of the deceased. This house has so much suffering within it. You can feel it, and the guy who runs this house has put up the pictures of all those who were murdered in this place. You read about their life story and how they were murdered. The first time I heard the calls for help from the ghosts, I was petrified. The guy who runs this haunted house reassures us that THR ghosts are harmless. It's legit and definitely not technology making the sounds. I work with technology behind media, and I can tell if someone is using technology. The house is old, and the guy has made some renovations all by himself when he bought it, to improve the looks of it. The sounds are real, and not made by the use of technology. One day, I took my friend to this haunted house, and he couldn't believe it when he started to hear the screams for help echoing throughout the house. It was so real, and there is a difference between real calls for help and ones produced by technology. The tapping sounds were real, and we both felt so useless that we couldn't help them. Then, as my friend rested upon a wall, the wall had opened. It was a secret room. This secret room had people tied up, and they were screaming for help. Then we realized that the house isn't haunted. Then me and my friend were caught by the guy who runs this supposed haunted house and trapped us in one of his secret rooms. My friend and I are shouting for help, but the people who visit this house think it's the haunted ghosts asking for help and banging on the walls. The carvings. I never believed in religion, the whole God, and the devil fighting an eternal battle for the souls of the doomed inhabitants of Earth. This isn't to say I wasn't spiritual. I felt that on some level, there was something at play in our day-to-day lives. The way in which occurrences take place seems too structured and organized to be random. A good example I like to use is, let's say you're meant to be at a meeting at 9 o'clock. You get up as usual and begin your daily routine to prepare yourself to get to the meeting on time. On the way out the house, you realize you've left your phone or wallet. This causes you to double back and waste precious time to retrieve the overlooked object. You get what you needed and set off on your journey, as you normally would. You get to a traffic light seconds before the car in front of you gets plowed into by a long-haul truck. Was it luck? Or did the higher beings at work cause you to delay, thus saving you from a terrible car accident? This then leads to the age-old debate about free will and fate. Did your conscious decisions play no part in your luck? Or were you destined to not be in an accident at that exact time? Anyway, I digress. I merely used my explanation of my somewhat agnostic thoughts to draw the conversation to another subject of the unexplained that I never bought into, and that is magic. Some call it voodoo, some magic, some the dark arts. I don't see how a clay doll made to look like me can get poked by needles, and I'll feel it physically. Nor do I see how it would be possible for a person to brew a love potion for a one-sided relationship. These kinds of ideas and beliefs are, for lack of a better word, ridiculous. Blind religion and belief in the supernatural has been around since the beginning of time, simply due to the fact that people needed a way to explain the phenomenon that was happening around them. Thunder and lightning in the sky. Well, that must be the gods in the sky clapping their hands and causing a stir. Surely, as we progressed as a society, our ability to understand and discover the nature of such occurrences would abolish any trace of superstition. The only thing stronger than belief in gods, demons, and superstition is the human mind. I remember reading that a gentleman in his prime, athletic and very healthy, was accidentally locked in an industrial-size freezer. When the doors of the freezer were opened the next day, they found the man dead, which the autopsy ruled as death from hypothermia. The strange thing was that the freezer was off. His brain was convinced he was in a freezing room, and so his body did what the brain told it to. I have no way to verify this story, but I know all too well how the placebo effect can influence our body's response to perceived stimulus. The mind is a powerful thing. I've never been big on outdoor activities. I'm more of a city slicker, to be honest. Working in sales and marketing, I had to be good with my words. Surviving in the woods would do me no good. My ability to sell ice to an Eskimo was undoubtedly one of my strong points. I can distinctly remember working a job at a mobile phone company, on the floor convincing customers why the new model of their phone cost double with no noticeable added features. My now fiancé was sitting where customers could sit and wait to be served. My shift was nearly over, and we were going to go for dinner afterwards. A gentleman that I had upsold not only a phone, but just about every possible accessory to, walked towards my partner and said to her with a smile, "Be careful of that one, he has the gift of the gab." She nodded in agreement while I chuckled to myself that a man I had never met was able to describe me so impeccably. My way with words extended beyond my sales gig. I had always loved writing stories. Ever since I could hold a pencil, I was writing stories to give my friends to read. The general consensus, according to my friend, parents, and teachers, was that I was indeed quite an exceptional writer. My bread and butter were horror stories. Growing up in a household that loved to read, I was very quickly drawn into Goosebumps, progressing onto Stephen King books to satisfy my thirst for blood and gore. The influence the horror king gave me was obvious in my writing. My dear mother would grimace and tell me that my writing was too dark. My father, too, said I should use my talent to uplift people and give them a sense of happiness, not images of blood and monsters tearing people apart. I decided to expand my horizons and began writing blogs about my day-to-day life. These blogs touched on issues that I faced: mental health, growing up and growing old, those kind of stories. I ventured further out of my familiar territory and began writing articles about nature, as one of my closest friends had detailed to me numerous times about the splendor and beauty he encountered on his many trips into nature. I felt in order to fully encapsulate these apparently jaw-dropping locations, I asked if I could accompany Aiden on his next excursion into the wild. My first and last journey into the unknown was a well-known mountainous area. There was, of course, the mountain of which we would traverse up. There were also some deep-rooted caves that lay beneath said mountain. They were natural caves, dating back to the start of time or so, Aiden said. Even as we pulled into the parking lot, I had to admit that the natural beauty around us had surpassed my expectations. The thick green treetops seemed to form a tunnel for adventurers to enter and set off on their journeys. The trees themselves were thicker than any trees I had ever seen in and around the parks in the city. They stood like giants, forming a barrier from the outside world to preserve the secrets within the thicket. With the car parked and locked, Aiden set the appropriate lens on his camera and suggested we begin the excursion with a visit down into the caves. Having never been into a cave, I was quite excited to see the wonders that awaited us. As we made our way into the very dark passage that led down into the caves, an old man sat on the floor. Shrouded in darkness, we were startled when the man spoke up, his voice reverberating throughout the cave. "Be respectful, my children," he said with a voice so deep, I felt the hairs on my neck rise. "These caves are home to all. Treat them as if they were your parents' homes," he continued. We remarked back that we would of course be respectful. Not much else to say to his comment. As we eased our way down the slippers chiseled steps in the rock, Aiden muttered that the curators of the place, giving such remarks at the entrance, made the caves seem like a tourist gimmick. I had to agree with him, but nonetheless the caves were mesmerizing. As we got closer to the bottom, bright light poured from above. Upon reaching the bottom and looking up, we saw that the top of a section of the cave had eroded, letting the sun in all its glory shine down upon us. The bottom of the cave was home to the most magnificent body of water I had ever seen. The water was dead still. Nothing stirred in it. The sun and sky giving the water an incredible blue hue, further complemented by the dark walls of the cave. Aiden and I stood in awe. Turning our heads from side to side, jaws dropped at the visual masterpiece we saw before us. The camera flash startled me as Aiden began snapping picture after picture of the magnificence. He told me to move closer to one of the walls so he could get me in one of the pictures. He walked over to me after the snapshot, claiming he had seen something when the flash went off. Turning to our trusty iPhones, we engaged the flashlights and shone them upon the stone wall. There were drawings etched into the stone. They depicted faces, not well drawn nor modern, but each of the faces had their mouths open in what appeared to be fear or pain. Maybe both. There were dozens of faces carved into the walls, each very different from the previous, being childhood friends who hadn't quite fully matured yet. Aiden and I thought it would make a great picture and memory if we carved our own drawings into the rock. With our Leatherman multi-tool that sported small blades, we began work on adding to the drawings on the wall. No sooner had we began the carving, we heard that voice boom from behind us yet again. "I told you to be respectful. I warned you," the old man screamed. "Since you want to add to the faces, I will happily oblige," he continued. Frozen in fear, neither of us talked. The infinite faces drawn on the wall lit up. Loud wails sounded from all around us, the sound of tormented people. People in pain and suffering. The faces oozed with red liquid. The only two faces that remained unchanged were ours. I tried my best to turn to look at Aiden or the old man, but I was frozen in place. The scream I felt build in my chest was unable to leave my body. The scream stemmed from the scalding burn I began to feel on my cheeks. It spread to the top of my head, all the way to my chin. It felt as if 1,000 tiny blades had been heated in the fires of hell and had begun work slicing into my skin. The blood that poured from the wounds felt like lava. Hell itself seemed to be emanating from my very body. As the blood poured out, my carving began to light up as the others had. The screams and shrieks became louder. I could feel their pain. I felt the screams in my very core. The pain ceased as my carving equaled the brightness of the others that went before me. Everything became black. It still is now. There is no light. There is no feeling. There's just nothingness. I have no concept of time in here. All I have are my thoughts. That is what I have been trying to express to you. I was stripped of my gift of gab mouth and ability to write beautifully descriptive work. I could not explain or talk my way out of this. I didn't have time to react, let alone talk. Every time a camera flashes and I get a glimpse of the outside world, all I can hope for is that whoever is taking the picture will see me. I know that when light hits my carved face, I can be seen. Maybe someone who has roots in superstition will see me, will see us, and know a way to get us out. There's so many of us in here. The screaming of all the souls that came before me still pierce my mind. I suppose my screams have joined theirs. I don't know if there is a God or not, but if there is, maybe he can help us. The Phantom Queen's Lament. Acme's trembling fingers traced the intricate patterns on her mother's jade hairpin, the last remnant of a life that seemed centuries past. The weight of memory pressed down on her. threatening to crush what little remained of her sanity. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." In the cracked mirror before her, a stranger stared back. Gone was the proud princess of a prosperous kingdom. In her place stood a gaunt specter, with matted white hair and eyes that glowed an unnatural red. Acme could barely recognize herself anymore. The screams of that fateful night echoed in her mind, the clash of steel, her father's head hitting the floor with a sickening thud, her mother's final, desperate plea cut short. Acme had fled, the warm splash of blood on her cheek, a constant reminder of her cowardice. A sob caught in her throat, quickly turning into a bitter laugh. What use were tears now, after all she had done? The Yurei Masakari pulsed at her side, its presence both a comfort and a curse. Acme's hand found its handle, fingers curling around the familiar grip. The massive axe, with its skull-shaped pommel and ruby eyes, had become an extension of her very being. Vengeance, it whispered in the recesses of her mind. Justice for the fallen. Acme rose on unsteady feet, stumbling to the balcony of her dark castle. The sight that greeted her was a masterpiece of horror, a canvas painted with the brush strokes of her madness. Her kingdom of the dead sprawled before her, a wasteland cloaked in perpetual twilight. The ground pulsated like a living thing, oozing a foul ichor that hissed and steamed where it touched. Twisted trees clawed at the sickly green sky, their branches adorned not with leaves, but with the writhing bodies of the damned. Their agonized moans formed a constant, discordant symphony that echoed across the blighted land. In the distance, a chorus of fresh screams rose from the valley. The newly dead, their souls trapped in mutilated bodies that refused to die. Acme closed her eyes, letting the sounds wash over her. Each cry was a note in a beautiful melody of suffering, a lullaby that soothed her fractured mind. "You did this," a voice accused, sweet and terrible. Acme's eyes snapped open. There, at the edge of the balcony, stood a little girl in a blood-stained kimono. Herself, from so long ago. But this apparition's eyes glowed with the same ruby light as the Yurei Masakari, and her smile was full of needle-sharp teeth. "No," Acme whispered, backing away. "You're not real." The child giggled, the sound like breaking glass. "We're a monster," she said, her voice overlapping with the whispers of the Yurei Masakari. "Isn't it wonderful?" For a moment, clarity pierced the fog of madness. Acme saw herself clearly not a righteous avenger, but a broken girl who had let pain twist her into something monstrous. The weight of every life she'd taken, every atrocity she'd committed, came crashing down. "I never wanted this," she choked out, falling to her knees. "I just wanted the pain to end." But as quickly as it had come, the moment of lucidity passed. The Yurei Masakari's whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Weakness," it seemed to say. "They will destroy us. You must be strong." Acme's grip on the axe tightened, her knuckles turning white. She felt something snap inside her mind, like a dam breaking. Dark waters rushed in, drowning out the last vestiges of her humanity. "Yes," she hissed, her eyes blazing with renewed malevolence. "We will be strong. We will make them all pay." She descended the winding staircase, the Yurei Masakari dragging behind her with a sound like screaming steel. Each step left a smear of black ichor, as if the very stones of the castle wept at her passing. In the grand hall, a group of captured villagers huddled together, their eyes wide with terror. They had been brought here as sacrifices, fuel for the Yurei Masakari's insatiable hunger. A young woman fell to her knees, hands clasped in supplication. "Please," she begged, "have mercy. We've done nothing wrong." Acme tilted her head, studying the woman with detached curiosity. In her fractured mind, the supplicant's face shifted, becoming that of her mother in her final moments. "Mercy?" Acme's voice was a rasp, barely recognizable as human. "There is no mercy in this world, only power. The Yurei Masakari fell. The woman's scream was cut short, replaced by a wet, choking sound. But death was not the end. Akemi watched with savage glee as the woman's soul was torn from her body, drawn into the axe's hungry blade. One by one, Akemi struck down the villagers. With each kill, she felt stronger, more powerful. The voices in her head grew louder, a chorus of the damned singing songs of blood and vengeance. When it was done, Akemi stood amid a sea of broken bodies, the floor a canvas of crimson and viscera. She raised the Yurei Masakari high, its ruby eyes blazing like twin infernos, pulsing in time with her frenzied heartbeat. "Rise," she commanded, her voice a tempest of anguish and power. "Rise and serve your queen." The corpses convulsed, a macabre dance of reanimation. Bones snapped back into place with sounds like mocking applause. Flesh knit itself together, forming grotesque mosaics of death given form. Soon, a dozen new undead warriors stood before her, their eyes glowing with the same baleful red as their mistress, their faces frozen in expressions of eternal agony. As Akemi turned to leave, a whimper caught her ear. There, in the corner, cowered a child no older than she had been on that fateful night. For a heartbeat, Akemi hesitated, a glimmer of her former self breaking through the madness. In the child's terrified eyes, she saw a reflection of her own lost innocence. But the moment passed, shattered by the Yurei Masakari's insistent pulse. Akemi's eyes hardened once more, any trace of mercy drowned in a sea of cold fury. She approached the child, axe raised high, its edge keening with anticipation. "Welcome to my kingdom," she crooned, her voice a perversion of motherly affection. "Your suffering will be the cornerstone of my new world." As the axe fell, somewhere deep in the labyrinth of Akemi's fractured mind, a small voice screamed in anguish. But it was too late. The princess was gone, devoured entirely by the phantom queen she had become. Akemi emerged into the courtyard, where her full army awaited. Thousands of undead warriors, wraiths, and abominations stood at attention. The sky above roiled with unnatural storms, mirroring the chaos in their queen's mind. "The living think they can stand against us," Akemi's voice boomed, carried on a wind that reeked of decay. "They think they can judge us, punish us for what we've become." She raised the Yurei Masakari, its blade drinking in what little light remained. "We will show them the true meaning of judgment. We will paint the world in blood and shadow." The undead host roared its approval, a sound like the howling of 1,000 tormented souls. Akemi felt their bloodlust, their hunger for destruction, and reveled in it. As her army began to march, intent on bringing death to all who still drew breath, Akemi paused. For the briefest moment, she caught sight of her reflection in the Yurei Masakari's polished blade. The face that stared back was barely human, a gaunt visage framed by writhing shadows, eyes burning with unholy fire. A single tear slid down her cheek, quickly swallowed by the darkness that cloaked her. It was the last remnant of Princess Akemi, a final droplet of humanity lost forever in the tempest of the Phantom Queen's madness. In the distance, a cock crowed, heralding the dawn. But in Akemi's realm, there would be only darkness forevermore. The war against the living had begun, and she would not rest until every soul was hers to command, until the whole world matched the desolation of her own twisted heart. The Yurei Masakari pulsed in her grasp, eager for the slaughter to come. Akemi threw back her head and laughed, the sound echoing across her blighted kingdom. In that laughter was the death of hope, the end of mercy, and the birth of an eternal nightmare. And yet, buried beneath layers of madness and malevolence, a tiny spark of Akemi's true self remained. Trapped, powerless, forced to witness the atrocities committed by the monster she had become. A silent observer, weeping for a redemption that would never come. My ghostly vacation. A few years ago, I went on a vacation to the oldest city in the U.S., St. Augustine, completely alone. Little did I know, this would happen to be one of my worst and scariest mistakes of my life. I chose to stay at a semi-sketchy motel quite literally across the street from a tour business. Turned out the across the street was actually across the highway, so it wasn't even worth it. When I walked into the lobby to get my room key, I saw how dingy the motel was. Paint peeling off the walls, a rug that looked like it had been through hell and back, an unchlorinated pool. Before you ask how I knew, the pool had a slight tint of green beyond glass that appeared to be unwashed for months, things like that. At least the attendant at the front desk was nice enough. My room was average, at best. The room was no better than the lobby, having almost the exact same features, excluding the fact that there were no USB outlets. Truly the scariest part of this story. Truly the worst possible timeline. But whatever, it was a place to stay at a great price, plus, a Denny's was attached. I had a nice day. I bought some souvenirs, and I went on some tours. I even saw a pretty cool snake. Soon the time came to sleep. The bed wasn't exactly comfy, but it wasn't miserable either. I fell asleep pretty alright. However, I was woken by strange sounds from outside my door. Banging, pulling, sounds of a struggle. I was concerned, so I went to peek through my curtains. However, no one was there. I told myself I was probably just tired, and I went back to sleep. There were no other events that night. The next day I went to some museums and even do a ghost tour. Now, did you read the title? Because this ghost tour happens to be a huge part of the story. We went to the old jail late at night, and our tour guide told the true story of one prisoner trying to scare us. And I, as a lot of people were, to some photos. The tour was fun, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that I was having. Eventually, we came upon the solitary confinement room. The room was designed to be incredibly dark, as to make the prisoners suffer. I took a photo with a flash, and when I checked it in my camera roll immediately after, it was fine. After the tour, nothing much happened. I just walked to a sketchy convenience store and walked back to my motel. That night, I was woken up by the incredible urge to go to the restroom, which was strange, because I hadn't drunk that much in the day. When I finished my business, I hopped back into bed. Suddenly, I was hit with the same unease I had when touring the jail. I don't know what came over me, but I checked my camera roll and looked at the photos I took. I came to the photo I took of the solitary confinement cell. The photo was all red. Corrupted. Not digitally corrupted, because there were no problems with the photo in the digital sense. Ever heard of spirit orbs? They are said to be the emotions of someone who has passed. In other words, an emotion ghost. And by my research, it was a large red orb, meaning it was an angered spirit. I shut off my phone, feeling very disturbed. However, when I turned to my side, I saw a shadow portrait of a person staring at me. My heart was pounding. There was nothing nearby that would cause an illusion to occur. I tried to tell myself I was tired, but I had extreme difficulty falling back to sleep due to just pure fear. I'm never going back to motels or St. Augustine. My parents keep telling strangers that I am a doctor. My parents keep going up to strangers and keeps telling them that I am a doctor. It's so embarrassing, and I have told them to stop many times, but they keep on doing it. At first, they would go up to 5 people a day, who are all strangers, and they would tell them that I am a doctor. It's excruciating, and when my parents do it when I'm not around, they carry around pictures of me. They show it to strangers, and they go on about how I am a doctor. It's terrible when they do it when I am present. It's like they don't notice or care about how distasteful their actions are. All jobs are important, and the shopkeeper who serves me at the till, I need him to be there so that I can get my coffee. The bin men are important, or otherwise people's waste would overflow, and rats and other germs would start making people sick. Same with cleaners. and without farmers or truckers, the whole civilization would crumble. I tried to tell my parents this, but they don't seem to listen, and they keep telling me how proud they are of me that I am a doctor. There were times when my parents would tell strangers that I was a doctor, with me being present. The comments they would get back, it gut-wrenching. It ranged from, "Don't give a shit," or, "And I'm a millionaire." But my parents seem to have increased the amount of strangers they tell that I am a doctor. From 5 strangers, they upped it to 10 strangers. I mean, they don't seem to become exhausted from telling people that I am a doctor. I had to tell them to stop as it was really humiliating, and we had a row over it. My parents then told that it was crucial that they tell people about what I do for a living. They also told me that they had to tell more people. It made no sense, and my parents told me that I had to just trust them. But I couldn't take it anymore. I don't want strangers learning about what I do for a living. And then my parents told me that they will tell strangers that I am a lawyer. Then one day I woke up, and I was a lawyer, and I had no knowledge of medicine anymore. My parents told me that the reason they need to tell a certain number of strangers of what I do on a daily basis is because I am a tulpa. My very existence is relied upon what people think of me and knowing of my existence. They now have to tell 20 strangers a day that I am a doctor. Panacea. The panacea, said to be the cure for all human disease, has been the goal of doctors and scientists for centuries. Dr. Coleman knew that many scientists have and continue to research and experiment with the sole purpose of achieving this goal. After all, he was no different. A working panacea would change the world of modern medicine. However, where others had failed, Dr. Coleman was confident he would succeed. He had the technology to make this a reality, and after years of research and development, he believed he had perfected it. Nanites, microscopic machines capable of performing medical procedures on a cellular level. Such technology could lead to renaissance in bioengineering. Being hailed among the scientific community was not, however, his primary motivation, nor was the idea of the lives this technology could save. No, the Dr. Coleman's motivation was more primal in nature. Leukemia, cancer of the blood, is caused by a genetic mutation that stops the body from producing blood cells correctly. The doctors had given him an approximate 5-year survival rate, and he could feel his body deteriorating faster with each passing year. With this technology, he believed he finally had the chance of saving himself and others. He lay back in the medical chair, the day finally upon him. The plan was to program the nanites to seek out the defective blood cells and remove them while performing repairs on the defective genetic material in the bone marrow cells, thus curing his condition. Dr. Coleman lay back and took a deep breath before activating the machine, feeling the fluid carrying the nanites slowly enter his bloodstream. It only took a few minutes before he could feel the nanites working in his body. The strange feeling that could only be described as a mixture of tingling and pins and needles started to envelop his whole body under his skin. The doctor felt a bit of unease at this, but quickly calmed himself. This was, after all, a medical procedure doing repairs on a cellular level. There was bound to be some discomfort. As he tried to calm himself, his head began to ache as he felt something running down from his nose. Blood. Something was wrong. As his unease turned to fear, so did the discomfort turn to burning pain in the back of his neck. He tried to sit up and deactivate the machine, but found that his limbs felt as though they were weighted down. He suddenly felt as though hot nails were being driven into the back of his neck, and panic set in as he realized he could no longer feel his limbs. He could hear what sounded like rushing water in his head as the pressure began to build. Each throb of his head was excruciating as blood began leaking from every orifice. As he lay gurgling in his own blood, he tried to let out a scream, but nothing came as his world faded to darkness. Hours later, the medical chair the former doctor sat in was dripping blood into a large pool on the floor. What remained in the chair could hardly be described as anything more than a bloody husk. As the nanites continued their work, the husk could be seen withering and deflating, spilling a fresh stream of bloody pulp and sinew. The doctor's face now resembled that of an ancient mummy, shriveled skin and hollow eye sockets. The remains of Dr. Coleman sat there in the medical chair. Only the sound of dripping could be heard. It wasn't long before the sound of footsteps, that of multiple people, could be heard approaching the laboratory. The door was swung open, and 2 men in suits armed with submachine guns entered and did a sweep of the area. Area clear. Objective is secured, sir. The 2 men lowered their weapons as 2 older men entered the room, their leader wearing a black winter coat. Following him was another scientist in a coat like that of the recently departed doctor. Excellent. Collect all the equipment and documents and prepare everything for transport immediately. Burn everything else to the ground. I don't want any loose ends, is that understood? Yes, sir. Good. The men immediately started doing what was instructed of them as he turned towards the scientist. My doctor, you made a serious mess out of this one. But I must give credit where it's due. It seems you were right after all. Thank you, sir, although I was hoping it would have been cleaner. They both turned to stare at the corpse in the medical chair as the 2 men start dousing it in petrol. Any new technology is bound to have its bugs. I'm sure you'll be able to fix them before our main event? Yes, sir. This is incredible. With the right application, this could change the balance of power forever. What's the report on surveillance? Primary functions online, sir. Searching for targets. Good. And our team at the hospital? Vaccines are already in place and awaiting modification. Excellent. They exit the room, and they both watch as the room is set ablaze, cold indifference in both their eyes as the flames engulf the room. Well then, I think it's time for a field test on a larger scale. A scary event, I remember. It was a sweltering day in June. My house had air conditioning only on the 1st and 2nd floors, but my room was on the 3rd, so my mother and I decided to sleep downstairs. The night was going quietly until I heard something bizarre, a faint, eerie whistle. I looked at my mom and asked, "Did you hear that?" She responded, "Yes." We asked my sisters if it was them, and they all said no, so we nervously went back to sleep, thinking it was just a prank. I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, sensing an oppressive heat that didn't make sense. The air conditioning was still running. I checked the time, it was 2:35 am. As I lay there, my eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, and I saw something darting between the couch and the kitchen. A small, shadowy figure was perched on the kitchen counter, staring at me with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it was just a nightmare, but the sinister whistle echoed through the room once more before I fell into an uneasy sleep. The most terrifying part came the next morning. I went to the fridge to get some milk, and as I sat on the counter, I noticed a piece of the quartz countertop was missing a jagged, claw-shaped gouge. My heart pounded as I recalled the night's events. I frantically told my sister everything, and we both shuddered in fear. In the end, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a bad dream. Something had been there with us, something malevolent that left its mark in more ways than one. The man who can make you a fun person. My friend always complained to me that he was a boring person. The only reason I am his friend is because I have known him since childhood, and our families know each other as well, so we are like brothers. He told me that he found a man who can make him fun, and I wished him all the best with it, even though I discouraged him from going to this stranger. I mean, this need to be fun will have the exact opposite effect. He just needed to relax and learn to enjoy things in life. He does suffer from anxiety, and he does struggle in social outings. I try to look out for him, and he is very intelligent and earns a great income from his job. I try to look out for him in social gatherings, and he has tried to be in relationships, but they have all failed. I mean, the idea of turning into a fun person is no fun at all. For him to even hire someone that claimed that he could turn him into a fun person worries me greatly. This is one of the reasons I always try to guide him. He is intelligent, but he doesn't have much emotional or social intelligence. He needs to stop trying too hard and just learn to stay calm and go with the flow. He was adamant, though, that he will become the life of the party when he learns to become fun. I mean, it's learning to be funny. With some things you either have it or you don't. My friend should stick with what he is good at. Not everyone is meant to be the life of the party. So my friend went off to see this guy, and he was ordered to leave his phone with someone, and he chose to leave it with me. So many red flags. Then I got a phone call from my friend's phone, but it was the stranger on the other end of the line, who my friend said could make him fun. I arrived at the destination he told me to go. I then observed two humanoid creatures joyously playing catch with the chopped-off limbs that was my friend. "Look, I have made your friend fun," he laughed hysterically. I drove off. I called the police and everything, but that man was nowhere to be found. Cedric in the cellar. Cat's mice. When I first met Cedric, he told me his name was JD, as in Jesus Delivery. I wasn't sure what that meant, so he handed me a Bible and pointed to a passage about how God hates warm peaches that gather flies. Then he talked me into doing things that I'm starting to regret. My mom noticed the cuts on my arm. One of them even spelled Cedric, but in slashes. Cedric said razor blades turn him on, so he asked me to post my cuts I made for him in his server. He said it was part of his special Jesus Delivery, to help his followers find solace in the name of the Father, the Son, and our Lord Joe Cedric. I started to have questions if things had gone too far when one of Cedric's other GFS asked me to do something for her. She requested that I go to the pet shop and request feeder mice. She wanted me to put on a leotard and rub the mouse on voice chat. She wanted me to tell her how the mouse smelled and how the texture felt. The next night she asked me to do the same, but on video chat, only this time she said, "You need to say you worship our Lord and Master Cedric as you squeeze the nape of its neck." So I did, but she said that Cedric really needed me to place the mouse in my mouth and bite down, but I refused. She then tried to say they were just feeder mice. That's what a snake would do anyway, so no need to be shy. I don't know who to tell this all to, so I came here. I don't know why I did any of this. I don't think I can tell my mom what I've been up to. I feel so alone. My Furby came to life that night. When I was 7, my parents got me a blue Furby for Christmas. I was so happy because I didn't have many friends. A lot of kids bullied me a lot because of it, and that was the reason I wanted a Furby. I named him James, and we had a lot of fun. One night I was sleeping, and suddenly I heard someone calling out my name, "Spencer, wake up, Spencer." I woke up, and I saw James on my bed. I thought this was strange because I left him on my bookshelf before I went to bed. I got up and grabbed him and took him to the bookshelf. But then he said, "I see you." I got scared and dropped him. Then he said, "Do you want to play?" I grabbed James and took him outside and threw him in the trash can. The next morning I was taking the trash out, but as I opened the big trash can, James was gone. And after that day, I never saw James again.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling content.